Good morning. I'm David Plazas, the Opinion and Engagement Editor for the Tennessean. We have the pleasure here of interviewing John Cooper, who is a councilman at large running for mayor of Nashville-Davidson County, and Maria DeVarine, our executive editor here at the Tennessean. This is part of a public service experience that we're doing this week where we've invited the 4 leading mayoral candidates and all the at-large Metro Council candidates to talk to us about the state of the city and what their ideas are to move forward. Welcome, Councilman Cooper.
Well, thank you, David. It's a privilege to be here. It's one of the reasons you run for mayor is to one day ending up with the Tennessean.
Well, we're pleased that you're here in our new building at 1801 West End. So we're very much alive and kicking.
Beautiful view.
Yes. What I want to ask you, I've seen your flyers, I've been to several forums, and at the heart of your campaign is that the city is not moving in the right direction, and that there are issues with transparency, there are issues with financing. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening in Nashville, a city that's booming so much, it's having so many financial issues?
Well, and thank you for the question, and I'm gonna adjust the question just a little bit. Right, in terms of the right direction, we are moving ahead, right or wrong. We're going to be growing more in the next 5 years than we did in the last 5 years. So the question is less right and wrong because we are on the growth train. It's how do we pay for growth? And for a long time, our city policies were really dedicated to creating growth. And so I think you have to say, chapter 1, wow, fantastic, take a bow. But if you look out your window here, growth is no longer the problem, getting growth. It's how to pay for growth and how to make the whole benefit receive a dividend from growth. Because our lives are challenged by growth, for sure. Traffic is worse, costs are up, rent is higher. So the trick is to bring the benefits from growth, which we're going to be having, back to people and to spread those benefits as broadly as we can, particularly in areas that really have not received any of the benefits from growth. So my response is as a financial person, as a money person, that you have to be very careful with resources in that environment. And so much of local government is getting resources back to what priorities are. Here in Tennessee, you have very regressive taxes, for example. It's the sales tax and the property tax. And so you really have to be extra careful to make sure that you're funding as best you can universal services, so that's public safety, that's education, and for the needy. Those are the two things that you're using these taxes for locally, and you've got to really do a good job with that out of the gate. So anyway, everybody wants to go right direction, wrong direction. Well, we're on this train track, so we can argue about right direction or wrong direction, or we can make the adjustment to getting a dividend from the growth back. So it's not can we grow, is how do we pay for all this growth that is happening? And you see it out your window here. It's an amazing thing.
Just a follow-up question. During the last few forums, Mayor Briley has been critical of you for not having presented your own budget, having been a former finance chairman, and this is an opportunity for you to talk about why that is and what your position on
well,
is.
in running for mayor, it's a little bit awkward in being on the council and running for mayor. When I knew I was going to run for mayor, and I realized that this is a mayoral-led government, my view is to get it done when you're mayor. Now, there's some things that people don't really know about the budget that do need the budget. No one has voted for the current mayor's budget. It was adopted by default. And that shows the power of the mayor's office. Also, the budget is mostly a spending document. And I have a lot of spending changes that I want to make. But ultimately, the path to the future is revenue improvement that is not property tax revenue. The city of Nashville has, it's called a revenue manual. Very few people have seen it. It's like 300 pages of the separate revenues that the city can collect. So the city needs to adjust its revenues, particularly from tourism and development, to make up for these spending shortfalls that have happened. So adjusting spending when really you need to add revenue is only half of the job of this budget. And famously, the revenue estimate is only set by the Director of Finance. working for the mayor here in Nashville. The council may not change that revenue number. So if your issue is adjusting the revenues, and again, why does the Music City Center only contribute to $10 million? Now, the fact that it contributes $10 million is in largely part due to my work starting last year. That's an evolving conversation with the tourism space. Then that's where the mayor needs to start in adjusting the revenue. So I think we all agree teachers need more pay. First responders need more pay. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that not by having a separate siloed off part of our economy, which this is the tourism and development space, and all the revenue is going to stay in that space and be reinvested in that space. The future is going to be balance. Now, every other city in our circumstances, had to work this out. The country of Japan last year had 30 million tourists. Now, we had 15 million tourists. So if you're talking about a tourism space of that size, then Fort Lauderdale's and the Key West and the New Orleans have begun to work it out together where there is balance in what the residents get out of tourism and what stays in tourism and development. Now, it's easy to misunderstand this. We have an important industry here, which is tourism, and it needs investment. Our problem, or it's not our problem, but frankly, we need that 15 to grow to 16, needs to grow to 17. We need a software for those tourists that is enriching and brings them back. That will require investment. But at the same time, the tourism and development space, the way it was set up 10 years ago, has really done well. So 10 years ago, when the Music City Center was started, Professor Fox at UT did his study about what might be collected by the Music City Center in 2019. Well, it was about $40 million in tax revenue. This year it'll be $135 million in taxes. It's successful at a level no one predicted. Everybody needs to take a bow. But equally, the costs created by the growth are greater than expected and bringing some of that money back. Now, there are a lot of different pockets. The Visitor and Convention Bureau, for example, went from a few $100,000 to a single $millions worth of subsidy from the hotel tax to now $30 million. Wow, okay. That's an adjustment, and so one of my proposals is at least some of that money needs to come back for program funding in our cultural institutions. That'll enrich the residents who are here. That'll create better institutions. That will create more tourism in the future as we reinvest in that specific space. That's the kind of rebalancing and adjustment that I'm talking about when I'm running.
Thank you.
But I'm happy to go on and on. On the question of me, the mayor is, I think, fond of saying that when I was budget and finance chairman a couple of years ago, that I didn't raise taxes. Well, no, I didn't. And I'm always a little puzzled because does this mean that he is for raising taxes? Because he consistently has said that he isn't. So how are you criticizing me now for not raising taxes? I didn't raise taxes. Our fund balance actually was, this is all inside baseball, but it's the kind of political poll-driven argument that gets made late in a campaign. Our fund balances are actually better than his administration's fund balances. And our money went for pay. This was the first year of the famous 3% pay increase was done. Which part of this is he objecting to? It actually sounds like everything that he would naturally value. So I accept it as a kind of a poll-driven, late in a campaign kind of thing that people come up. But if he wants to embrace saying that he wants to raise taxes and it's criticizing me for not raising taxes, then that's fine. But to make that kind of argument when in fact, it's inconsistent with his own policy is, again, just politics as usual.
Share with us your viewpoint about the outlying counties and residents there who play in Nashville, work in Nashville, drive in and contribute to traffic in Nashville. Yeah. How would you like to see them contribute to some of the cost burden?
Well, I'm a big optimist, and I do think the regional environment on traffic and transportation will lead the legislature to be constructive in a regional solution, which is what has to happen. ultimately, I mean, people forget that Murfreesboro, Rutherford County, is really going to be bigger than Knox County, right? And Williamson County is going to be bigger than Hamilton County and Chattanooga. If you think of Middle Tennessee as a larger Nashville surrounded by what used to be these other large cities in Tennessee, you realize it is a regional problem. Now, part of my problem with last year's transit plan that it really did not have this regional aspect going forward. But in time, our partners are going to be the legislators from the surrounding counties because they are suffering from the same problems that we are. If we have traffic and we're not fond of it, but if you're in Wilson County, it's going to sting even more if you're working in Nashville. They have an even greater incentive to be for a regional solution. Now, the mayor needs to be constructive in that conversation. And it's fond of us in a blue county and a red legislature to kind of, people go back and forth. Really, the mayor is the one person in Davidson County who should not be out there criticizing the legislature day in and day out, but trying to find a mature adult working relationship with them. Of course you're not going to agree. You may not even agree on most things, but a third of our city budget comes from transfer payments from the state and the federal government. These are large checks that are being written. We want other large checks too. We want money for a regional solution to transportation. We want affordable housing tax credits greater than what they're allocated right now. We want better BEP funding. So to get that done, the mayor has to go up to the legislature and work with them. And having this kind of, I can't ever work with them because they're so red and they're so blue, okay, but the job is to get beyond that.
Tell us a little bit about your qualifications and why you think you stand out among your other colleagues.
Right. Well, I've been involved in politics a little bit my whole life, but really was a business person the last 30 years in banking and finance and real estate. And 4 years ago, I ran for at-large, and it was a great experience, and I ended up really getting more votes, I believe, than anybody since Joanne North, the great Joanne North, and that she has the all-time record in getting votes going back to the beginning of Metro, and I'm maybe in second place. She's an incredible, inspirational figure. And in part because cities are about land use and finance. And we're not doing a very good job in either aspect. I could go into a lot of detail. And then being on the council, I had a finance background, and I began to personally research the deals that we were doing. And I began to see a pattern that really, we started out, there's a labor union friend of me told me this, and I want to quote them, that Phil Bredesen, who was a great mayor, taught us to love the deal, the ability of the deal to improve a city. And he did some amazing deals, and they were all shrewd. They were all shrewd. You may agree or disagree about how they're working out. You all reported on the Dell deal today, but that was a strategic deal. That had some deep thinking about the future of Nashville going on. The Nissan Stadium deal is remarkable in all regards. We forget there was a referendum. The ticket holders paid for half the stadium. It was located in the right place to help propel Nashville into another era. There was a public library involved, so you balanced the relative needs. The upside was fantastic. You had 200 million Americans mentioning Nashville every weekend, all fall long. So that was just an extraordinary deal. But we began to think of the mayor's office as doing deals. Those deals were amazing and strategic, and then we just began to do deals, right? And deals a little bit for their own sake, and we began to value mayors by just doing deals. Well, you need a really thoughtful manager to do that for you if you're going to do that. And ultimately, the deals that happened, particularly the deals that I looked into, really were more subsidies than they were deals for the city, right? The MDHA began to do kind of luxury condo parking projects, for example, over time. We end up, we really pay, the amount is slightly over that now, but basically more in cash to the Omni Hotel than the city makes in hotel tax. which is an astounding fact if you think about that. The Fifth and Broadway deal is kind of a legend on its own, that the most valuable block in Nashville would be sold for $5 million when it was worth maybe $100 million. And worthy that the $5 million went to the Barnes Fund, but then the Barnes Fund was completely shortchanged. And then all the future property taxes from the site end up in a TIF loan, so we're not going to get any property taxes from it for a long time. And then we build a $34 million parking garage on the site itself, so we sell it for $5 million. We don't have future property taxes. We put a $34 million property tax paid for by tourist money, right? And then the sales taxes collected from those wonderful new businesses that are going to go on it is going back to the Music City Center and not to the general fund. Wow. Wow. At some point, our deal making fell apart. And my view is that with my background, now I've done some things, I mean, people say developer, that's actually a qualification for the modern Nashville. To know something about development, to know something about value. What is the job of the mayor but to supervise really a series of billion-dollar capital plans that are happening simultaneously? We're going to need one, a large one on transportation. Schools is another area. Famously, our stormwater and water investment, even the sidewalk program. You need somebody who can sit there and go, $1,200 a linear foot for a sidewalk is not appropriate for Nashville, with other cities are paying $200 or $300 a linear foot. So having that business background, I think, is the right background. Having started businesses and started projects that are pretty large in scope and them being successful gives you the confidence actually to sit there and to bring basic business judgment back to Nashville. And that's what I discovered on the council, is we are not conducting public business in a way that anybody in the business community would say that's a good practice. That is a good practice. And it goes pretty far. There are lots of things, you know, fortunately you all have covered some of it, but how do you fix it? You don't fix it from the council, right? You try. The council really is more of a jury, and it's a kind of a county institution pretending to be a city council. When Metro happened, it's really more of the county taking over the city, and you have kind of county government practices being the practices that you have. So the Metro Council and I was able to prevent some things from happening, but ultimately we're in a mayoral system, and if its management changes, if it's additional revenues from management and management savings from kind of long-term practice improvements, then only the mayor can do that. And ultimately, that's why I'm running for mayor.
Let me ask you a follow-up on that.
Sure.
I'm
Sorry, David.
Just,
And you cut me off if I get too wordy. I can have a lot of things I want to say.
Related to debt, if you're elected mayor, how will you address the issue of the liabilities that the city has? And at the same time, there's been discussion about the use of general obligation bonds in the future. Would you be in support of not issuing them, or how would you finance infrastructure projects in the future?
Well, with your viewers, I want to share something that I wrote. I'm on the ballot on August the 1st, but also on the ballot is a referendum measure which has a charter change requiring kind of fair reporting of both debt and then performance metrics by departments. There's some leeway in the construction of the performance metrics. The other night at a debate, the mayor attacked the Tennessean for its reporting on debt, right? Which was kind of crazy because I think you've done a great job. But how is it that that's even a question? How is it that you're in a city that the statistics about debt are so kind of masked that you would have a difference of opinion between what the leading newspaper has reported it as being and what the mayor wishes you think that it is, right? So the reality is our debt situation in the county is worse than people think. And it has happened because of kind of deceptive reporting practices where something known as commercial paper, right, which historically the finance department has said that's not debt, but any business person in the world would tell you that it's debt, ballooned up to just under $1 billion, $750 million. If you're not reporting big expenditures like that as debt, you are playing gotcha with the public when finally it is bonded out and formally reported as debt. And on the council here, it's kind of shocking. The council passed, at Finance's request, what is $2.6 billion of debt, new debt, or obligations for debt. How much is that? Well, the state of Tennessee has only issued $1.9 billion worth of debt. So you're talking about $600 million more than the entire state of Tennessee being issued by this council in this past term. So is the spending wrong? No, many of it is worthy, but you've got to execute it. And you also are going to have to take a little bit of a break and slow it down. You know, the reality is there's a backlog of over $1 billion of projects that are appropriated and funded that are just sitting there. Well, let's take some time and work that list down. Let's go ahead and perform what we need to perform. And then also, let's get some value for this. Now, I'll tell you, it's a shock. I am on the audit committee. The last several $1 billion of metro capital projects has only had about 6 audits, going back for 15 years. Imagine billions of dollars of government spending unaudited, carefully unaudited, right? So the question of, are we even getting the right value, right? And are we having best practices on our past spending is a big question, but let's make it apply to what is in our backlog. Now, I had a recent meeting with a bunch of architects and developers who do school construction around the state, and I'll tell you, their view is our school per square foot school construction estimate spending is really out of line with anything else in the state. Okay, well, let's find that out before we commit to hundreds of millions of dollars, and let's bring it in as efficiently as possible. And that's, again, why a manager is mayor. I'm fond of saying this, and I hope a majority of people in Davidson County agree. I believe I'm the right mayor for right now. I might not have been 10 years ago or 10 years in the future, but with our financial problems, where debt service is taking half of our new money, where we're up to kind of $6,500 worth of GO debt per person in the county, which is like really high across the country, right? In that moment, you do need a manager. If you're not able to afford pay increases, if your teachers are going famously underfunded over a period of time, then these are all management problems. These are all money and management problems, and paying attention to what you're doing, and that's what we owe people, is we owe the most efficient use of the regressive tax money that we collect.
Can you tell our viewers what your top 2 or 3 priorities would be in your first year if you're elected?
Well, changing procurement and how we contract for services has to be the first thing. And then I'm fond of saying I want to get pictures, photographs of teachers and principals, and I want to cover the wall of the mayor's office with them, so that everybody that comes in with a spending idea for the city has those teachers and principals looking down at them, and I can say, do you need it more than them? Now, in some cases, you'll be making those investments, I'm sure. But what's happened in Metro is you no longer understand the trade-offs. With one hand, you pretend that you have a lot of money, and then with the other hand, you go, oh my gosh, we have no money at all. The creative tension in government is completely gone. We do incentives in January, and then in June, when you do the budget, you don't really have any money. And it's these trade-offs. I want to, in effect, for every spending request to go, it's worthy, but we have 2,700 homeless children. We have 2,700 homeless children. Is your spending going to help them? And if so, how? And it's a funny thing about, just to spend a moment, it's kind of a national term. It's been around for a couple of generations, trickle-down economics. You know, for a long time, people have said, well, trickle-down economics. And Democrats have always said, oh my gosh, trickle-down economics don't really work. And yet, that is Metro's strategy for so much, that we subsidize buildings and then hope that the landlords somehow trickle down benefits actually to people. And it doesn't work. Landlords are very careful, smart people. They're able to capture those benefits at a high level. So Metro's approach is really needs to be to invest in people. So when a company comes to town, you don't say, how much can we give to your building or into your site? And there are a couple of sites over here that are getting significant contributions from Metro. When, by the way, we make other parts of the county pay 100% of their own costs. So you have to then, for a moment, just looking at your beautiful view, and it caught my eye for a second. But then you have to be fairly strict on what's going on with that. And you have to say to those people, I want you to come, I want you to bring jobs that our people can have, and what skills do you need from our people that you're going to be employing, not bringing a workforce from somewhere else and having jobs that our people will not be eligible to. Who are you going to employ in our community, and what training do you need for them to have? And then that's how we're going to spend our incentive money going forward, is qualifying the people here. And the greatness of a city, there are different levels of greatness, but right now the one that we need to be working on is how do you get people to $15 an hour, and then to $25 an hour, and then to $30 an hour. And that's how you're going to measure the greatness of our city right now.
Okay.
You were recently endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police for mayor, and you
yes.
talked about in your news release about the fact that even though you had competing interests when it came to the property tax vote, they still came behind
They
you.
did.
Why do you think, who is supporting you? Why do you think you're getting the support? How does your message resonate? And this is also related because one big theme in your campaign has been Fort Negley. If you could also talk a little bit about that
okay.
too.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to have the Fraternal Order of the Police endorsement, and the first words I said to them also is that they need to know I voted for the Civilian Oversight Board, and of course that's something that they're not for, but I think they share with me a vision for Nashville not being managed in a bumper car fashion, you know, where pitting one interest against them, and kind of a Hunger Games management style where the police's interest is pitted against another interest, but a Nashville that works together, and that they are appropriately valued. The police in Nashville used to be part of our family, and they feel like they've fallen out of that relationship, and I think people feel like that too, and we all want the same thing. We want an effective working family relationship with the police going forward. Now, I did not vote for the property tax increase because of a lot of what we've talked about here, that it's unfair to raise taxes, to impose another cost of growth out on the public when there are sources of money that is not coming out of their pocket. And it's our obligation in the next period of time to go find that money if we can, and I think we can, work with the state legislature, work with downtown development to have a stricter approach to what we're willing to give away in order to find the money as the priority. The next mayor, there may not be as many ribbons, but it's going to be back to basics. Now, that financial stewardship is an important part of the campaign, but then also preservation. And you mentioned Fort Negley. My campaign is for everybody that is not feeling like we're necessarily managing growth as well as we should, right? It's that cherry tree scooter moment where people look up and go, is this the Nashville? It's sort of feeling out of control and not being managed for us necessarily, is to get it back to where people feel like it's being managed for us, and that neighborhoods, of course, come first. Shouldn't even really be a question at this point in Nashville. The kind of the inert management practices that have gone on, in some cases, have just gone on a little bit too long. We're not aware that the Music City Center will have this year like $190 million of surplus unreserved cash pooled up in a checking account, right? You have to be on it with those practices. There are going to be advocates to protect that for sure, but you need to grow beyond that. And that Fort Negley, which is, for your viewers, which is the most important African-American historic site in Tennessee, maybe anywhere, recently won the UNESCO World Heritage designation, right, in Nashville, that we were on the verge of giving half of that over to development for kind of a nominal amount of money, because we're all for development, aren't we? Even though this is green space downtown in this incredible symbol for a new city, which is other former Confederate capitals, and yes, we were a former Confederate capital, have these statues and history to deal with. We have Fort Negley, where impressed slaves, impressed by the Union Army to build a fort for their own freedom where hundreds die and are buried on the site, any other city in America would go, that's our symbol. That's our symbol going forward in the 21st century. That we were willing to give that over to development shows how kind of blind we got at one point. And I think our way back dates from the saving of Negley and going forward from that. But it's a sign of how weird this whole development bent is, that we're so bent on development that you would give up this sort of sacred spot, and also a sacred spot. I mean, it's also just bad development, because that area of Nashville is exploding. You have tens of thousands of more units. I'm not making that number up. Really, within a short area from Fort Negley, how are you getting rid of the green space? Since our modern view of green space needs to be that it's out in the community and you use it as an amenity and you use it to get around a city through greenways and bikeways and protected paths.
Just related with Fort Negley, just to be fair, it was under Mayor Berry's administration where they tried to develop, and Mayor Briley, at least on paper, committed to preserving it.
He did.
How is his approach different from yours?
You mean on
Fort
part?
Negley.
Well, on Negley, yes, he did. Once it was all over and Mayor Berry committed not going forward with the development plan, then David becomes mayor, and he does appropriately fund the tearing down of Greer Stadium. However, his administration now has embarked on the sale of and swapping of other material green spaces. And so almost immediately, Fort Negley is saved and Greer Stadium is coming down, but then the sale of the Edmondson site at Mayoral School is advanced in his budget, which now then that's the site of the most important African-American artist in Tennessee. There's a Smithsonian tour going around the country of important artists in the 20th century, and William Edmondson's art is the front centerpiece of that collection. That exhibit needs to come to Nashville. How do you then try to sell the 11 acres that's over at William Edmondson, right? The Church Street Park downtown, green space that is fundamental to our most important civic space in Tennessee, Capitol, War Memorial, Hermitage, the new federal courthouse, the library. This is the only green space in this space, and then we're swapping it out for a 60-story condo tower, luxury condo tower. So though Negley was saved, the principle has not completely been learned yet. Right, that you protect green space, particularly in your important civic areas and particularly in your exploding areas, because again, the Edmondson Mayoral School site, which again was narrowly averted from being saved. Now, it was pushed over into other property sales elsewhere, and several of these, like at Zero Brick Church, right, I've been able to get them saved from kind of the grim reaper. And then, just as this aside, you talk about why do you need a management guy doing this? The strategy for selling this land, one, it's wrong to sell it, and two, you don't do it on eBid, right? You don't just list it on a commercial eBid, particularly when it's kind of complicated land. So on Charlotte Avenue, the salt bin property, that has environmental problems. You know, what are you doing listing land there, because you're never going to be able to close on it or close at it at really the fair price? The Green Hills Fire Station. Several times those auctions ended up failing, right? To speculatively sell land on eBid that's really possibly cities' foundational assets is just a management practice that nobody in the real estate industry would agree with. And that's why supervision with a private sector level of competence of what the city is doing is a necessity for us to have a great city going forward.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the Nashville Public Schools and your viewpoint about if the mayor or the city council should be more involved in the day-to-day operation or how they're governed?
Well, yes. I mean, it's another question for the season, and I do believe that there's a moment with the interim superintendent and the school board of cooperation and working together. Now, it's not helped if people go back to kind of the failed sort of rhetoric and kind of politics rhetoric that we lurch back towards too. And I think the job of the city council and of the next mayor starts out by being relatively simple, and then I'll give you a question both financially and then operationally. Financially, we need a period of time where more than half of our new money goes to education, because the amount of education in the budget has really fallen below 40%, and it used to be closer to 50%, and we need to build that up by commitment with more than half of our money goes to education. And then we need to work with the school board and say, we're doing this for you. You need for the bulk of that money to go to teacher pay and retention. And what we want to see is what I think they want to see, because I think it's the only way, or the way, that all schools get better. Isn't it interesting that all schools get better the same way, or school systems? You have a good superintendent who's got good judgment, but then you hire great principals and you support them. And then those principals hire great teachers and retain them. Now, both of those are going to require some money, and then you get parental involvement. And the current school board system, though imperfect, has the advantage of that each school board member does represent 9,500 kids and their parents. So you've got 9,500 kids and you've got 15 to 18,000 parents. Well, those parents need to feel like they are involved in picking a person to represent them on the school board, I believe. I mean, it's popular to say it should go to an appointed system, and maybe some members should be appointed, and maybe there should be some at-large. But I don't think you can ever leave if parental involvement is one of your 3 pillar goals for improving education, I don't think you can then exclude them from their direct representative on the board, which is the system that you have now. So you may need to layer in other support mechanisms, but you just can't say to that many parents, each school board, hey, you have no voice in who is representing you on the school board. And that's how we got to the system where we are. Now, the Chamber of Commerce recently had a fabulous trip to Austin, Texas, and the school system there has demographically similar to ours, but there are a lot of differences, but good results. Now, part of that is you've got an IT workforce skill set in that population that I think is helpful inherently to school systems and the valuing of education, and we, of course, need to be getting on that as a city. But apparently they said this was not possible here in Austin but for our elected 9-member school board, which is, of course, exactly what we have in Nashville. So you can't assume that you're going to have, you can have different outcomes from the same inputs. It depends on the people, the quality of the people, and the ability to work forward. Now, the job of the mayor going forward is going to get this over allocation of money done to education. I say over allocation, increased allocation. I don't think you can over allocate to schools. But then it is to recruit, and to recruit at all levels. Let's not kid ourselves. I think the Vanderbilt coach or the UT football coach would tell you right there, a lot of this is about recruitment. It's going and getting and keeping the best people right there, and as you get the mayor involved in that, that's clearly going to be helpful. And then it's the job of the mayor to convene. You have all these great nonprofits working in this space, but they're not coordinated. They're not necessarily commissioned. They're all kind of guessing what might be helpful to the school board in the effort going forward, or to the school systems. Well, let's get everybody on the same page and commission the nonprofits in ways of being effective, as opposed to burning up resources trying to be effective. And then so it's convening and commissioning going forward. Now, Community Achieves been a fantastic program, wraparound services to schools. A little bit more than 20 schools has this program right now. Well, we only have 140 schools to go. All right, well, let's then commission that outreach. And Community Achieves is a kind of a private sector participation in thinking through what every school specifically needs. In some cases, schools may need after-school meals. Well, okay, if that's what the school needs, then let's get the community kind of to supplement and have that for that particular school. But so the mayor's job, if you do recruiting and convening and commissioning and coordinating, you're going to have a lot of value added to the education space. But if you're coming into it and you can't work with the school board and everybody is saying kind of slightly awkward things about each other coming into it, yes, you can go back to having a period that you regret of this kind of awkward political phase, as opposed to it's 100% about management, right? It's the same thing again with the legislature. You may want to say things as mayor, but don't. Your job is to manage. Your job is to work with people. Your job is to inspire, and particularly in education, it's easy to criticize. That's not really that productive in education. You're dealing with people who are on a mission for their whole life to improve people's lives. That's not appropriate to have criticism in that space. The people who are working there are really committed, and what you have to do is provide resources and a structure for improvement that everybody feels improved and supported.
Thank you.
And as we can conclude, would you tell our viewers one last time why they should vote for you and how they might be able to contact you if they'd like to learn more about you?
Well, thank you. It's been a privilege to be here. JohnCooper4Nashville.com. It's a pretty full website full of position papers and videos. And please look at that and volunteer and join my campaign, because Nashville is at a crossroads. If we get the next period right, we'll be Nashville, the city that we all came here for or were born here for, which is an extraordinary opportunity to be the greatest city in the country, because we have it all if we don't get development wrong. Now, we can just be another city, and we can get our finances wrong so that we never really fund anything appropriately, and neighborhoods in the end never ever did have a sidewalk, right? But in this time of our greatest boom, this is our opportunity. Every one of these cranes is increasing our costs, for sure, but creates the opportunity to build the right new city, because it is being built right in front of our eyes right now. And that's why a mayor who knows something about finance and something about land use is critical right now, and to change the practices that kind of got us into this problem, right? Which were really the evolved practices of a smaller city that was desperate to grow, frankly, but that has worked. Now we've got 15 million tourists. We have a vibrant business community. Everything is going right if we make the right adjustments right now to value who we were and to manage the cost of growth going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
And we want to thank our viewers. Again, you can watch these videos on Tennessean.com. Remember that July 2nd is the deadline to register to vote. Early voting starts on July 12th, and August 1st is your last chance to vote in this election. Remember, your vote